It is recorded by one of his biographers that an American gentleman once went to hear him for the first time, in consequence of the report he heard of his preaching powers. The day was rainy, the congregation comparatively thin, and the beginning of the sermon rather heavy. Our American friend began to say to himself, "This man is no great wonder after all." He looked around and saw the congregation as little interested as himself. One old man in front of the pulpit had fallen asleep. But all at once Whitefield stopped short. His countenance changed, and then he suddenly broke forth in an altered tone. "If I had come to speak to you in my own name, you might well rest your elbows on your knees, and your heads on your hands, and sleep, and once in a while look up, and say, 'What is this babbler talking of?' But I have not come to you in my own name. No, I have come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." Here he brought down his hand and foot with a force that made the building ring. "And I must and will be heard." The congregation started. The old man woke up at once. "Aye, aye," cried Whitefield, fixing eyes on him. "I've waked you up, have I? I meant to do it. I am not come here to preach to stocks and stones. I have come to you in the name of the Lord God of hosts, and I must and will have an audience." The hearers were stripped of their apathy at once. Every word of the sermon after this was heard with deep attention, and the American gentleman never forgot it. One more feature in Whitefield's preaching deserves special notice, and that is the immense amount of pathos and feeling which it always contained. It was no uncommon thing with him to weep profusely in the pulpit. Cornelius Winter, who often accompanied him in his latter journeys, went so far as to say that he hardly ever knew him get through a sermon without some tears. There seems to have been nothing of affectation in this. He felt intensely for the souls before him, and his feelings found an outlet. Of all the ingredients of his success in preaching, none, I suspect, were so powerful as this. It awakened affectations, and touched secret springs in men, which no amount of reasoning and demonstration could have moved. It smoothed down the prejudices which many had conceived against him. They could not hate the man who wept so much over their souls. "I came to hear you," said one to him, "with my pocket full of stones, intending to break your head. But your sermon got the better of me and broke my heart." Once become satisfied that a man loves you, and you will listen gladly to anything he has to say. I will now ask the reader to add to this analysis of Whitefield's preaching that even by nature he possessed several of the rarest gifts which fit a man to be an orator. His action was perfect, so perfect that even Garrick, the famous actor, gave it unqualified praise. His voice was as wonderful as his action, so powerful that he could make 30,000 people hear him at once, and yet so musical and well-toned that some said he could raise tears by his pronunciation of the word Mesopotamia. His manner in the pulpit was so curiously graceful and fascinating that it was said that no one could hear him for 5 minutes without forgetting that he squinted. His fluency and command of appropriate language were of the highest order, prompting him always to use the right word and to put it in the right place. Add, I repeat, these gifts to the things already mentioned, and then consider whether there is not sufficient in our hands to account for his power and popularity as a preacher. For my own part, I have no hesitation in saying that I believe no English preacher has ever possessed such a combination of excellent qualifications as Whitefield. Some, no doubt, have surpassed him in some of his gifts. Others perhaps have equalled him in others. But for a well-balanced combination of some of the finest gifts that a preacher can possess, united with an unrivalled voice, manner, delivery, action, and command of words, Whitefield, I repeat my opinion, stands alone. No Englishman, I believe, dead or alive, has ever equalled him, and I suspect we shall always find that, just in proportion as preachers have approached that curious combination of rare gifts which Whitefield possessed, just in that very proportion have they attained that Clarendon defines true eloquence to be a strange power of making themselves believed. The inner life and personal character of this great spiritual hero of the last century are a branch of my subject on which I shall not dwell at any length. In fact, there is no necessity for my doing so. He was a singularly transparent man. There was nothing about him requiring apology or explanation. His faults and good qualities were both clear and plain as noonday. I shall therefore content myself with simply pointing out the prominent features of his character, so far as they can be gathered from his letters and the accounts of his contemporaries, and then bring my sketch of him to a conclusion. He was a man of deep and unfeigned humility. No one can read the 1400 letters of his, published by Dr. Gillies, without observing this. Again and again, in the very zenith of his popularity, we find him speaking of himself and his works in the lowest and lowliest terms. "God be merciful to me, a sinner," he writes on September 11, 1753, "and give me, for his infinite mercy's sake, an humble, thankful, and resigned heart. Truly, I am viler than the vilest, and stand amazed at his employing such a wretch as I am. Let none of my friends," he writes on December 27th, 1753, "cry to such a sluggish, lukewarm, unprofitable worm, spare thyself. Rather spur me on, I pray you, with an awake thou sleeper, and begin to do something for thy God." Language like this, no doubt, seems foolishness and affectation to the world, but the well-instructed Bible reader will see in it the heartfelt experience of all the brightest saints. It is the language of men like Baxter and Brainerd and McShane. It is the same mind that was in the inspired Apostle Paul. Those that have most light and grace are always the humblest men.